So there are a variety of crisis response strategies that can be described as are aligned to like an organizational posture.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of them, but probably the most in our face, the denial, wasn't us, what's not our problem, diminishment, it's not as big as you think, rebuilding, and then of course bolstering, right? So can you just walk through those crisis response strategies and any other that come to mind for you as postures for organizations to consider?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as the data's come in from the various studies that have gone on out there, we know some things work and we know some things really don't work. And what's very obvious is that denial doesn't work. It's obvious to everyone except the person doing the denial. And I've had discussions with professionals, and they said, like, just take denial out there so people don't even think about it. And I've tried to frame it so that if you're in an operational crisis, don't even consider denial as an option, because it comes back to hurt you. But we know why they engage in denial. We have these certain built-in biases and one of the biases is we hate loss, and so we try to avoid loss at all costs. So we're not thinking to the future what we might gain from engaging in crisis communication. We're thinking about the immediate loss we would have if there is a crisis. And if I can engage in denial, at least for today, I don't have a crisis and I have prevented loss. But that's very short-sighted, and I'm sure there are cases where companies gambled and it worked, but we'll never know because they're not going to tell. But we see cases where they gambled and it didn't work, and it's going to be worse for them. And so that's the denial strategy. Bolstering is always a supplemental strategy. Bolstering isn't something you do by itself, because it would be weird if you do it by yourself. And we have a lot of data and also case studies that show that, when a company just engages in bolstering, and bolstering would be such things as reminding them of your past good works. And for instance, you'll talk about what you did in terms of corporate social responsibility. Like, last year we gave a lot of money to the community, or we ran the local blood drive. Well, that's great, but that has nothing to do with this situation. And people realize that if it's used in isolation, that's why you can use it as a supplemental strategy. And another bolstering strategy is to thank people who've helped you, which, again, that's very human to thank the first responders, to thank your customers who stayed with you. Toyota did that during their big crisis with brakes. They thanked all their dealers and their customers for sticking with them. But if that was the only response they made, it would make very little sense. It would not help to address victim concerns. Because if we go back to empathy, it's about the people who suffered. And bolstering is not about them. It's about you. It's about what you've done in the past. To say, we've done something bad here, but we've done a lot of good. And so that bolstering by itself just doesn't work out well. And I've been telling people that for a very long time, and there's now good data to support that. Bolstering just doesn't. It's really very secondary. You can engage in minimization, and that's a very risky strategy, because a good example of that is when there is an industrial accident, they'll say, like, well, this is even among the 10 worst in the world. Well, the people affected don't care where it ranks, right? If you've had damage to your home, or you've been evacuated out of your home for 2 days, you don't care if this is the 35th worst accident or it's the second. You care that this impacted me. Where is it with us? And again, you run those kind of risks with minimization. But sometimes, though, you do need to minimize it because it's been overblown and people think there's some serious problem when there's not. It's like, well, really, there's no risk. For instance, there's a white cloud that's been released with your explosion at your facility, and people think this is going to kill them. And you're like, no, this is very safe. Don't worry. Unless you have asthma, it's not going to be a problem. That's when you would minimize, but you would need that because you're trying to reduce people's fear and then taking inappropriate actions in those lines. And then you have the kind of the rebuild or to trying to be as accommodative as possible. Working on, again, the apologies and the compensation. And, all of those come after you've already done the ethical based response for them, because the ethical based response really is about the victims. It's about their physical safety. It's about their psychological well-being. It's driven by empathy and concern for them. And that's why you do that first. And then as you need to, you add in other strategies, depending upon the situation. Because if you don't start at the core, and like people will say like, well, we've done a study and we found that the ethical based response doesn't help really with the end reputation. And my response is, well, I don't care, because I have to protect those people. It's about them. It's not then about the outcome of reputation or purchase attention, which we talk about. It's like, yeah, you can address those later, but your initial concern is about the victims. Ideally, that helps you later, but it doesn't matter if it helps you later or not. It is the right thing to do, and it's what you should do. And so I don't, for that, and I've seen this talked about in some of the other literature, like on psychological first aid, which has been integrating that in as kind of, because a lot of what we talk about in the ethical based response is psychological first aid. And like, well, can we really document perfectly how well it helps people? It's like, not always, but it's the right thing to do. And at some point you have to go with really what's right to do.